So it's very nice to meet so many people so well turned out in what is obviously so much second-hand kit, which just proves that sustainability can be completely gorgeous. It's also very nice to be here among optimists, because I'm an environmentalist for my sins, and I'm not used to be surrounded by so much optimism. Environmentalists are very, very good at telling you what's going wrong. And that's a lovely sweeping generalization, and the only way to deal with a sweeping generalization is, of course, to refer to a light bulb. So, how many environmentalists does it take to change a light bulb? Well, the answer is obvious, it's 4, yeah? 1, to change the bulb. 1, to tell you, no, not that one, no, the other, the expensive, the energy efficient one. 1, to ask, just what do you intend to do with the old one? I hope you're not going to throw it in the bin and it's all going to leach into the stomachs of baby dolphins, are you? And 1, to point out that, yeah, right, well, with Armageddon looming, yeah, I mean, light bulbs will soon be a thing of the past, yeah, I mean, even the military-industrial complex isn't going to be able to make them fast enough for us, yeah, so you might as well get used to candlelight, yeah, although make sure it's beeswax, not petroleum, otherwise you'll be warming the world while still breathing in the volatile organic compounds, yeah. Although, on the other hand, do you really feel right about stealing the wax from the bees? Yeah. I mean, I exaggerate, but I exaggerate only slightly. Take The Guardian, which I do, God bless it, it's a brilliant paper, but you wouldn't really say that when it comes to this kind of sustainability stuff, it's exactly sunny side up. I think it's never happier than adopting what might be loosely called the missionary position in journalism. There was a piece that they put together a little while ago. It was called The 13 Impossible Crises that Humanity Now Faces. And the first line in it was, please don't read this unless you are feeling strong. And it took us through this funereal litany of Trump and Brexit, of robots stealing our jobs, of climate meltdown and soil erosion and looming starvation and soaring inequality. And at the end, it assured us that it was doing so not to depress us, but to concentrate our minds on the scale of the task. Which just makes you wonder how many horsemen of the bleeding apocalypse they'd want to summon up if they really wanted to get us down. Now, of course, nobody doubts the seriousness of the crisis. Nobody doubts the campaigning zeal of The Guardian and its writers. But there is something about this piece that goes a long way towards explaining why environmentalism hasn't conquered the world. And it has spent the last 50 years trying. And at first, when they kicked off, they assumed that all they needed to do was get across the scale of what was happening, and the scales would fall from people's eyes, and their minds would indeed be concentrated on the scale of the task. And they did this by ushering in a period of quite grandiose comparisons, and funnily enough, it was always Belgium that was the comparator of choice. So, some land the same extent as Belgium is threatened with desertification. As many whales as there are Belgians have been slaughtered since 1950. An area of rainforest the size of Belgium is being burned down every year, and so on, until the only conceivable response was, look, if you're going to burn down something the size of Belgium, what's wrong with Belgium? Now, when that didn't work, they put the frighteners on us. Climate change is coming, and it's going to destroy civilization as we know it. Be afraid, be very afraid. And they kept saying it. And people sort of got scared. And then when climate change didn't happen that evening, they tended to relax a bit. And so like a junkie trying to get a bigger hit, they became almost addicted to fear and delighted when bad news happened. And the worst example of this, I was a student at the time when the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania went into partial meltdown. And at the time I was campaigning for the Ecology Party, always being a patron saint of lost causes, the precursor of the Green Party. And I was watching the news with a fellow campaigner. When the news ended, this guy went, yes! And I thought, no, half of New York could be wiped out. It's not really yes, is it? But he was quite charismatic, and I was slightly intimidated by him, so of course I went, yes. And the big problem with trying to scare people in something big as climate change is our evolution. Because our evolution has programmed us to respond to imminent, tangible threats. There's a saber-toothed tiger. Shit, run. And then three things happen. Either one, you get eaten. Two, you get away. Or, oh, it wasn't a saber-toothed tiger after all. And you relax and you breathe again. And the thing about climate change, yes, it's imminent. Yes, it's big. But for most people, it's not really tangible. So if you keep coming up with these saber-toothed tigers, it tends to lead to one of two reactions. Either you have people in a state of constant high anxiety, yet feeling the threat is so big, there's bugger all they can do about it. Or you go into denial, and people think, to mix the animal metaphor a bit, that you've just been crying wolf. And they react by saying, yeah, sure, I know there are problems, and you've been saying that for a while, about 30 years, and, the sun still rose this morning, and if you don't mind, I've got to get the kids to school, and I've got to get ready to work. And so fear doesn't do the job. So then, what your sort of desperate activists, and it's activists of any hue, not just environmentalists, can take refuge in is that other trump card. Climate change is coming, and it's going to destroy civilization, as we know, and it's all your fault. And the thing about making people feel guilty is it might work with a naughty child or with a grown-up if you live in Islington, but this sort of sustained weapons-grade guilt-tripping does absolutely nothing to appeal to those billions of people. I don't mean here in liberal Bloomsbury, but in Bolton or Birmingham or Bangladesh who are just trying to get by day to day, would absolutely love something to feel guilty about, would adore a bit of conspicuous consumerism which trashes the planet once in a while. So it's hardly surprising that with a few exceptions, this kind of approach, this kind of pessimistic approach, has failed to win hearts and minds on a scale commensurate with the task. And it's not activists alone. We're all at it. We become past masters of accentuating the negative and expertly ignoring any evidence that some things, some of the time, might just be getting better because people are pulling their fingers out and doing stuff. And that could and should give us hope. But it's hard to see it in the face of the relentless message we get from the media. When news is only news if something's being blown up or somebody's being shown up. You're familiar with the phrase, if it bleeds, it leads, and good news is no news at all. And I've been a journalist for as long as I've been an environmentalist, and I can tell you there is a kind of weird machismo in journalism that unless you're exposing how crap everything is, you're not a real journalist. And now, sure, you want to shed light on wrongdoing. That's part of what the press is for. But if that's all you do, it's actually pretty irresponsible because it suggests that all human endeavor is doomed to failure. And that's far from the truth. And just a few examples. So, an example people really find hard to get hold of. We hear about the horrors of the war in Syria, say, or Yemen, and they are horrific. But we forget that compared to, say, the Chinese Civil War, or the Korean War, or the slaughter which followed the partition of India, which is all in living memory for some, the death toll is way, way, way smaller. The proportion of people killed in wars today of any sort is 1/10 those that were being killed in wars in 1950. It's 1/4 those who were being killed in wars in 1980. You might not believe it. It's quite hard to believe because we get swamped by all this war on our screens. But we are living in one of the most peaceful times in human history. And we worry ourselves sick over terrorism. In America, it's often identified as the number one threat to life and limb. And yet, the truth is, the average American is statistically more likely to die by being drowned in a bath than at the hands of a terrorist. We worry about Ebola, quite right too. We worry about how malaria is set to spread as climate change takes hold, and it is. But how often do we hear that malaria deaths have fallen by 60% in the last 15 years alone, or that the deaths of children due to diarrhea and other waterborne diseases have dropped by a third in just over a decade? And why has this happened? It's happened because there are millions of people working their asses off to make miracles happen, and we don't sing their praises nearly often enough. And it happens at the local level too. We worry about the obesity crisis. We don't hear about the network of medical practices in rundown areas of Detroit that are prescribing fresh fruit and veg, that are proving more effective than some of the drug treatments, that are better value for money, and their patients are getting better as a result. Or Thameside Hospital in Greater Manchester, which has banned all sugary drinks and snacks on the premises. and to pull out to the macro scale, we see every hurricane, every earthquake, every typhoon in full gory detail. But we don't hear very much that 2017, which is the last year when these records were kept, had the fewest number of deaths due to natural disasters on record. And that's not because there are fewer disasters. It's because we've got really good at predicting and preparing for them, thanks to people throwing themselves at the problem and working half the night and half their lives to crack it. And we hear about the bling and materialism of football. We don't hear about the ex-Manchester United full-back and his wife, who opened a packaging-free food shop because they were so inspired by the slogan, "If not us, who? If not now, when?" And we hear about horrendous droughts in Africa, and there are plenty going on. We don't hear about the people of Tigray in Ethiopia who are transforming their landscape, putting terraces along the contour lines, little micro dams, planting millions of trees, holding the water back, conserving the soil, making the country greener than it has been in 150 years. And the leader of that particular program said, "The soil before was red and bare like raw meat. Now it gives me fodder for my cattle. If people work together," he said, "anything is possible." And that about sums it up. I mean, I'd suggest that there are a dozen times more acts of positivity, creativity, and kindness that come into our lives every day than there are ones of spite or violence. And yet we hear about the violence and the unkindnesses. The writer Steven Pinker, who's done more than most to chart these unsung progressions, if you like, summed it up. He said, "We never see a journalist saying to the camera, 'I'm reporting live from a country where war has not broken out.' This relentless negativity, this programs us to expect bad things. And it's so damn demotivating. It kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You expect crap, crap is what you'll get. Now, you might say, oh, well, it's kind of human nature, look on the gloomy side, that's kind of what we do. Is it human nature? Is it bollocks? Imagine if our early human ancestors, down there in the Rift Valley, when we were just starting out, had the equivalent of today's media, or even of some more of today's more downbeat activists, in their ear half the time, feeding them the same relentless diet of doom as we get today. You can imagine the result of the conversation. One guy says, well, shall we head over that hill, see what's on the other side? Might meet some interesting people there. Widen the gene pool a bit, spread out a bit. And someone will say, oh, there's not really any point. I mean, we'll only get eaten by lions, and they're probably all terrorists anyway, so let's just stay here and inbreed till we die. And that's not what we did. We got out of the Rift Valley, we spread across the globe. We did so because we aspire, we reach for the stars, we get excited by possibilities. And that's just as well that is so deep in our human nature, because tackling some of the massive systemic challenges like climate change, like poverty, they demand the sort of creativity, energy, the willingness to take risks that have characterized the most ambitious human endeavors all the way down the centuries. We get so busy sometimes talking, with reason, about planetary limits, that we forget there are no limits to human ingenuity. But if we're going to tap into that, we need a sense of optimism as to what is possible. And this is where the story turns. Because I get the feeling, and I think all of you out there are living proof of this, that activism is changing. And there's a new kind of activism afoot, and it's awash with stories of possibility, with stuff that people are doing that is changing lives for the better in the here and now. And within that, we're starting to see a new kind of environmentalism that is so far away from that fear-inducing, guilt-tripping style, because it's relentlessly focused on solutions. And there are hundreds of examples. We're going to hear some as the awards unfurl tonight, but I'll pick out just one, a big shining one. Back in the 60s, 70s, environmentalists started to get really excited about solar power, and yet it seemed like such a pipe dream. It was so far away because it was so damn expensive. 1975, the cost of solar power per watt was $101. And then it started coming down and coming down and coming down. In 2015, it was 61 cents a watt. So that's a fall of about 200 times. And in the 3 years since then, it's dropped by another half. It's now about 32 cents and falling. No one saw that coming. None of the experts, the International Energy Agency, whose job it is to monitor these things, not the solar industry itself. It was one of those great big nice surprises that we never factor in when we've got the gloom on. And solar is now cost competitive with existing fossil fuel plants, never mind nuclear, it far outstrips nuclear. It's the cheapest form of energy in an increasing number of countries in the world. Oh, and if you think Donald Trump is going to wreck it, relax. More Americans now work in solar than in coal. More Americans now work in clean energy, the whole area of clean energy, than the whole of the oil and gas sector combined. Trump can't stop this. This is economic logic. The markets are trumping Trump on solar energy. And the biggest unsung impacts that solar is having is on the lives of people in some of the poorest communities in Africa and Asia. So just imagine for a moment, imagine you're a householder in rural Bangladesh, and you're 10 miles from the nearest road, you're 20 miles from the nearest power line, you're relying on smoky, dangerous kerosene for lighting. You knock over a kerosene lantern, you burn your clothes, you burn your hair, you burn your house down. And now for the same price as the kerosene for a single lantern, you can pay installments on a solar system that gives you half a dozen clean, bright LED lights. It gives you power for a radio. So your kids can study properly in the evening without their eyes smarting from kerosene fumes and without fighting over which one's going to peer close to the lantern to do their homework. At the same time as you can do the cooking, or you can do extra work to get some valuable extra money. And the beauty of it all is once you've paid the credit off on those installments, the fuel comes free at sunrise every morning. And as well as light, solar is powering mobiles as well, both the phones themselves and increasingly the base stations which power them, which power the network. And the mobiles don't just mean you can keep in touch with your far-flung family, although they do. They don't just mean you can send messages and increasingly money to and fro. It doesn't just mean that if you're a woman walking through the village at night, you feel that little bit safer. It means economic power too. And this was brought home to me. Ed mentioned the Ashton Awards. I was doing a visit on behalf of the Ashton Awards in Bangladesh and talking to fishermen. In a remote community, they got solar power miles from the nearest road or electricity grid. And this guy, this fisherman, was telling me the difference between life before mobiles and after mobiles. And he said before mobiles, what he did, he went out, he did his fishing at night, in the morning he came back, and he had to go straight to the nearest harbour and sell his fish whatever price he could get. Otherwise the fish would spoil in the sun. He had a little boat, hadn't got any refrigerators or anything like that. And now what he does is he goes out, he does his fishing, and then he sits about half a mile offshore, and he gets on the phone. And he phones the guy in this harbour, and the guy in this harbour, and the guy in this harbour, and he waits to see who's going to give him the best price. And at a stroke, that had doubled his income. In some cases, they said it had tripled their income. So it literally had put power in the palm of his hand, in about as most climate-friendly, sustainable a way as possible. So this is the benefits of technology, but technology with a human heart and technology with humans at its heart. And the nice thing about this, and thinking particularly of those of you who are working in business this evening, this wasn't the result of aid money or government funding, not for the most part. This was a commercial company making money by selling solar power at affordable prices. So it was cheaper than a polluting alternative to people who would otherwise never get all the benefits of this. So this was entrepreneurialism driven by a spirit of can-do optimism. And it was combining, if you like, the best of activism with the best of business too. To use a phrase the RSA started coming up with now, it's driven by people who think like a system but act like an entrepreneur, which I think is a gorgeous phrase. Think like a system but act like an entrepreneur. And there's one last aspect that gives me cause for optimism. And that's that I sense, and I might be being wildly optimistic myself in this, I sense that little by little, we're remembering how to wonder, how to stand in awe of the fantastic beauty of the natural world. And that was brought home to me by the giant eruption recently of action on plastics. Now, there have been some brilliant campaigns on plastics. First and foremost, the Pointless Plastics campaign, which Paula Owen and Karen Sutton have been absolutely at the forefront of. And they've been working really well. But what gave it a certain spurt in public attention was Blue Planet. And I think it got that spurt in public attention because people were watching this extraordinary beauty of the natural world. And they were in awe at it. And then there was those plastics coming in. And they said, oh, get rid of the bloody plastics. It's getting in the way of all the beauty. And I think that is also something that we can take hold of with optimism. There's that poem, that line from that poem. Many of you recognize it. What times are these when a conversation about trees is a crime because it implies silence about so many atrocities? Now, I'm not saying we should keep silent about atrocities, not a bit of it. I'm not against some righteous anger. We'd never have abolished the slave trade without righteous anger. And I don't want to come over as the bastard child of Pollyanna and Dr. Pangloss. I don't think that optimism will conquer all. But unless we're fired by a spirit of optimism, by the thrill of possibility, then we're not going to lift our little finger. And unless we feel that having conversations about trees is a really, really important thing to do and a really valuable use of our time, then we're not going to crack the wider problems. But the good news is it is changing. And I do feel we're at a cusp. It is changing fast. There's that climate optimism initiative, which I'm sure some of you have heard of. Ed Gillespie and his team at Futerra did a huge amount to kickstart that. It's really caught fire among businesses and among NGOs. Last week, the Demos think tank here in London launched its optimism project. And we've got shifts in the media now with titles like Positive News, reporting from the front lines of possibility. And I think best of all, we've got you guys. We've got everyone who's up for an award tonight, who are getting out there, who are doing stuff, and who are embracing optimism. And that is a fantastic cause for celebration. So I salute you guys, and I thank you for embracing optimism. Cheers.